Alex here with a legal nuts and bolts video on disqualification of judge. In Nevada, you can disqualify your judge, which effectively removes them from your case. Some people call it recusing your judge, but it's really what the judge does in response to being disqualified. They recuse themselves from the case. If you can show one of two things, either actual bias or implied bias. I'm just going to go straight into them. Implied bias is defined, at least my understanding of it. I've never done this myself personally, so make sure you do your own research before you just go off of what I say. My understanding is that implied bias is defined in the statutes as some kind of familial relationship with your opponent. So, like, if the judge is your opponent's mom or dad, sister, brother, aunt, uncle, I haven't looked how far. I guess they call it degrees of consanguinity, something like that, consanguinity. Degrees of blood connection. I don't know how far out it goes. I also don't know if relationship by affinity, also known as like by marriage, is a factor or is defined in the statutes. I really try to avoid making these videos about me just going up and looking at the NRS and stating exactly what the law is, because the law changes and I may interpret the law incorrectly, and I'm not allowed to give legal advice. I have an understanding of what implied bias is, and I suspect I can figure it out really quickly. But as I mentioned, I don't like to put that exact statute with the exact interpretation in the videos, because it could lead someone astray. They could misunderstand it, or it could change like in a year. So you'll have to look up and find out what implied bias would be in your case. I'm not sure if you could also include other situations, such as maybe if your judge like had a car accident with you at some point in your life. I don't know if that would constitute implied bias or not. It is something to look at. You can either check the statutes or existing case law in your state to determine if anyone has ever been able to disqualify a judge for implied bias because they had some kind of altercation. Um, Actual bias is pretty straightforward to explain, but it's extremely hard to actually get a judge to admit to actual bias. Actual bias means for whatever reason the judge is actually biased against you. People think that this is easy to do. They will file, especially non-lawyers. I mean, they'll file motions or affidavits saying that their judge is biased, and they'll explain all of this reasoning as to why. And to the person, it's like a slam dunk. Of course the judge is biased. They ruled against them in all of these different ways that were unfair. Therefore, actual bias, get off my case, I want a new judge. It's a very common impulse, like almost always the first impulse somebody gets when they lose is, how do I change my judge? Now. Um, but in reality, from what I've seen, actual bias almost, well, at least compared to implied bias, is almost never admitted to by the judge. I guess most judges just don't want to admit to it. Funny thing, my judge actually recused himself for actual bias, but it doesn't really fall into what I was just talking about, because I didn't actually try to assert that. I didn't file a motion or an affidavit. I didn't ask my judge to get off my case. He, on his own, recused himself for actual bias. Basically, he didn't like the website, ournevadajudges.com. He filed an affidavit saying that some of the articles were not his, and that because they were on the website, they gave him I can't remember what words he used, but they gave him an opinion of my credibility that he would not be able to set aside in court. And I mean, I have to hand it to him. I mean, I respect that he admitted it and recused himself without even me asking him to. But I guess you could say that's an example of actual bias, where the judge actually was biased against me. And in this case, he admitted it and he got off the case, and I got a new judge. It was all very unexpected and quite a shock, because if anyone's looked at the website, ournevadajudges.com, they'll see that it's not at all just based on a specific single judge. It's pretty much all of the judges in Nevada. I don't know why I don't want to go into that. I'll just stop and mention a couple other details. If I remember correctly, and again, you have to check this yourself in your own state. If I remember correctly, in Nevada, to have a judge recused or disqualified for actual or implied bias, I believe it's done by filing an affidavit, but I suspect that you have to also file a motion at the same time to trigger some kind of briefing. So I suspect that you need to file a motion. An affidavit with that motion is required. I believe that the affidavit has to articulate the reasons as to why there may be actual or implied bias. And curiously, this type of motion is heard by the chief judge, or a different judge at the very least. It's not heard by the judge that you're trying to have recused. It's heard by a different judge, and that judge makes the ruling on your motion to disqualify the judge. Before I go, I did want to remind people about the Peremptory challenge of judge, which is a special tool or mechanism that we have here in Nevada. From what I've heard, it's not that common for other states to allow you to do this. A peremptory challenge of judge is a completely different way to remove your judge from your case. It always works. The judge has no way to stop it as long as it's filed properly. And by properly, I mean it has to be filed within a certain amount of time, and you have to pay the big fee. There's like a, I can't remember what the fee is, but it's pretty high. My time, when I was representing myself, I think it was $300, and now I believe it's gone up to $450. But you don't have to prove anything. You don't even have to explain your reasons. You just filed a peremptory challenge of judge. It's like a one-sheet piece of paper. Your opponent doesn't even get to do anything about it, and just the judge is gone. Please watch the video on peremptory challenge of judge if you want to get the details on how that works in Nevada. And if anyone has seen that their state also allows them to use a similar mechanism, please post in the comments below. I'm sure that'll be useful to a lot of the other viewers who might be interested in using that kind of that tool. For what it's worth, disqualifying your judge because of bias is a lot cheaper. I'm not even sure there's a fee, but if there is, I think it's like $25. It's something really low, which compared to the $450 peremptory challenge of judge fee, it just pales in comparison. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this video, and I'll see you guys next time.